What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we are covering Green Arrow Rebirth, which is actually a tie-in. We haven't covered Green Arrow for a while, mostly because I kind of lost interest in the stories. I like the idea of Green Arrow and Black Canary getting back together, and there were a couple stories that were pretty good, but for the most part, I've kind of dropped off. But this one picks up in the aftermath of Heroes in Crisis, so it's more like a Heroes in Crisis tie-in, but it is a pretty cool story because this really deals with the death of Roy Harper. Now, when it comes to Roy Harper's funeral, you guys will actually notice it's pretty small. It's not a very big funeral, right? This is not like the death of Superman, where it's like this worldwide celebrated superhero is passed on. And this is designed to happen for a couple different reasons. The first is because Roy Harper was never a huge superhero. He was never on the level of like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, or anything like that, which is something Oliver Queen's gonna hit on here in a second. But the other reason is because it's more private and it's more closed off, and the location itself is symbolic. Now, for those of you guys who are very familiar with Roy Harper's history, you guys will understand why this is so important. But with regards to this little tidbit here, you have Oliver Queen who really just kind of muses to himself and talks about maybe it's a dream, maybe none of it's true. Some of the people who are here don't feel like they should be here, different things like that. You've got Diana, you've got Wonder Woman who shows up and she starts talking to them and so on. But Oliver Queen himself really begins to look at some introspection and ask the question, was he really as good of really as like a father figure for Roy Harper as he should have been? Because there comes a point when Roy Harper, just before he went to Sanctuary, had come to Oliver Queen and talked to him about what was going on, basically saying, look, he was going to seek help, and Oliver Queen essentially blew him off and said, look, he's got other things to worry about, and didn't give Roy Harper the time he needed, which meant that Roy Harper was for the most part sulking and basically dealing in loneliness. And that's a very rough place to be, because for Oliver, he looks back at Roy and says he wasn't as good of a father figure as he should have been. You know, that he was more of a mentor, which he actually hits on again here in a second. And so really Oliver Queen begins to lash out, because when he starts to talk about the notion of Sanctuary, his argument here is Roy Harper went to Sanctuary to find help. What he found was death. And instead of the various members of the Justice League saying we're the ones at fault, they're like, well, we don't know who did this, we're trying to figure it out. Oliver Queen loses it and actually goes to attack Superman. Now, it's a great moment here, because we know that under normal circumstances, Oliver Queen never would have went to pull this off. But the other half of this is, this was so dangerous about Oliver, he could basically turn the world of Superman upside down. Like, he could literally just broadcast to the world, hey everyone, Clark Kent's actually Superman. Don't believe me? Take his glasses off and watch what happens. And then realize how stupid you guys are, because you didn't realize that Superman puts on glasses and suddenly he's a whole different guy now. Because I can tell you guys right now, I can take my glasses off and you guys would be like, yep, that's Comics Explained. Like, I know him because of his face and his voice and everything. Glasses don't change that. Like, these small things. But you end up having really everybody kind of jumping in the way and basically telling Oliver it's not their fault. But Oliver doesn't care. And the reason why is because Oliver is looking to transition blame. That's really what's going on here. Oliver Queen's guilt-ridden by the death of Roy Harper. He's guilt-ridden by the fact that a person that he met in his younger years, who he took under his wing as a mentor, ultimately perished when he was seeking help, and Oliver Queen didn't give him the kind of help that he needed. Oliver's looking over every single mistake he ever made, every choice he ever made, every decision that was made with regards to Roy Harper, and then realizing that he didn't do everything he could have. And the result is that now that Roy Harper's dead, there's no way to make up for that. There's no way to compensate for that and to finally find a way to bring that back. There's no way to make that happen. And so where he begins to sort of tear into Superman and to say, this is your fault. You know, he came to you guys for help. He came to you guys for aid. And instead, you got him killed. Batman's not here. He's out looking for everybody's killer. Why aren't you guys looking for the killer? It's one of these things where he just kind of lashes out in every direction, just spews every ounce of pain and anguish that he feels in every single direction, because the truth of the matter is that Oliver Queen's hurting. Like, he's lost the closest person he's known to a brother, and he's just taking it out on everybody. And so in return, he ends up having Martian Manhunter basically whisk him away telepathically. And Martian Manhunter begins speaking truth to reason and basically saying, look, this is not the fault of anybody here. It's not Batman's fault. It's not Superman's fault. It's not Wonder Woman's fault. It's none of their faults. They're all here grieving just like you are. So let them grieve. Let them deal with the loss of their friend. And it's a very touching moment and a very important moment here, because it's just Oliver Queen suffering and in anguish. And how many of us have been in a situation like this where that's all we want to do is lash out and be angry and scream and shout and stomp our feet and say, it's not fair though. Like, how many of us have been in that situation, and how many of us want to respond accordingly? But you have to be able to understand that everybody's coming to this from a different perspective. And so the result here is that you end up having Donna Troy, who basically steps up and she begins really telling her story about Roy, that the two of them were friends. The two of of them were people who worked together. The indication was that they were basically lovers. I don't know if they ever really were or not, but they were basically partners, and that he would go to the limits in order to make sure that she was safe, to do whatever he needed to do in order to make sure that his teammates always came back. And it's kind of a funny thing, because what she says is that while all this was happening, while Roy Harper was fighting on the Titans, while Roy Harper was doing the best he could to be the best teammate he could, he was also fighting his own demons. And that's kind of the saddest thing about this, and that's what really stings when it comes to Oliver Queen the most, is that Roy Harper was fighting his own demons and Oliver Queen wasn't helping him. And that's what really seems to crush his character so much, is because he became just as much of a burden, or even if not a burden, certainly no measure of an aid for Roy Harper as he did, as Roy Harper's own problems. And so it's interesting here, because he goes to sit down and runs across a woman who's basically named Annie. And the idea was that she was an addict just like Roy Harper was, because of course, Roy Harper was a heroin addict, but she was an addict just like Roy Harper was. And the result is that, Roy Harper basically, helped her to get clean. And that's when we end up learning the reason why this location was chosen for the funeral had nothing to do with anything being arbitrary. It was because this is where Roy Harper basically chose to become sober. It's where he chose to clean his life up and move away from drug use. And so it's a very symbolic and a very important place to him. And it's one of the things that basically, that's really the most important aspect of his life. And so talking with Black Canary, Oliver continues to kind of muse to himself and say, look, I was not the kind of person that Roy Harper needed me to be. And he thinks back to the old Green Lantern, Green Arrow stories, the snowbirds don't fly, when Roy Harper had suddenly vanished. And for the guys who never read that story, Roy Harper disappeared. The idea was like, what happened to Roy? Like, what happened to Red Arrow? Is he gone? Or I guess Speedy back then, but like, is he gone? Did somebody take him? That's the kind of thing that was rolling through the story and rolling through the mind of Oliver Queen while Green Lantern was trying to help him. Ultimately, they basically found him in like a back alley shooting up heroin. And so like with that going on, Oliver lashed out. He completely freaked out on Roy instead of asking the question, but why are you doing this though? Like, why would you do something like this? And so what he did is he looked back and he realized that what Roy needed was a father figure. He didn't really need a mentor. I mean, he needed a mentor, but what he needed was someone to be his father, someone to guide him throughout all facets of life, not someone to party with, not someone to run amok and fight, various villains with, not someone to train him with, someone to always be there to put his hand on his shoulder and say, no matter what happens, I will always be here for you. That's what Roy Harper needed. And that's what Oliver never gave him. And that's what's so crushing for him, is because he knew what he should have done, but he never did it the entire time. And so for him, it's a devastating experience, because you end up having everybody basically planting trinkets and their own objects in order to help him, help Roy pass on to the next life. But Oliver Queen's just kind of left as the last man standing. He's the last man there. And he just kind of thinks over everything that happens. He thinks over everything that's gone on. He thinks over all the choices that he's ever made with Roy's character. And it constantly comes back to the same thing. In a time when Roy needed him the most, in a time when Roy needed his help, in a time when Roy needed someone to talk to, when Roy needed someone to reach out to, Oliver Queen wasn't there. He was off fighting supervillains, dealing with Black Canary, all that kind of good stuff. And never once did he really tend to the kind of things that Roy Harper needed. But that's kind of the interesting thing about this, is because it really is Oliver Queen being unnecessarily hard on himself. Because we could argue that if Roy Harper was really here, Roy Harper would just say, you did the best you could. And that's all anybody ever can do. The best they can do. That's all you can ever ask for. We do the best we can with the circumstances we have and the experience, wisdom, and knowledge we have at the time. And that's it. That's all anybody can ever ask for. So it's a pretty cool moment. It's a pretty cool little segment here. And it's definitely a beautifully written story. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.